Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this John Schofield Trust online session. I hope you're all keeping well. Good to have you all on the Zoom call this evening. It's a shame it's not in person, but hey, I guess we are where we are. My name is Louise Hastings. I am the managing editor of Sky News. I'm also very proud to be one of the trustees of the John Schofield Trust, which, as you know, aims to improve social mobility in UK newsrooms through its mentoring schemes. This evening, we thought that we would do a slightly different masterclass and we would look at some of the different jobs in a multimedia newsroom, possibly some of them less obvious than others, and the kind of skills that you need to do those jobs. And I am joined by some rather wonderful guests who, between them, I'm sure they won't mind me saying, have clocked up quite a range of different jobs in their careers. So I'm going to get them to introduce themselves, and I shall start with Gamal.
Hello everyone, thanks very much for joining us. I'm Gamal Fahnbulleh. I am one of the presenters here at Sky News. I work right across the output, starting on the breakfast programme at 6 o'clock in the morning, which is what I'm working on this weekend. And I do the news at 10, which is what I'm working on this evening, our flagship programme. So like I say, I work right across the output, and I also work on some of the other digital platforms as well. I work on online podcasts, social, that kind of stuff. And I've been doing that. I've been in the industry for the best part of 15, 16 years. So yeah, it's great to be a journo. Probably the best job in the world. Highly recommend it. If you are thinking of being a journo, do it, do it, do it. Sign on the dotted line. You're not going to regret it.
Very effusive. I love that. Hazel, introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Lou. I'm Hazel Baker and I work at the news agency Reuters. I'm just going to explain quickly what Reuters is, because if you don't work in newsrooms, it's not always that obvious. So Reuters is a big company. It's global, and it has over 2,000 journalists around the world doing different things. So some of those journalists write news reports, text reports, and put them out on the newswire. They write quickly. Sometimes they write long-term investigations. We also have photographers who capture key moments of history and put out those pictures to other newsrooms around the world. And we also have a video operation. And I started at Reuters in the video operation, and I've kind of moved on a little since then. But all of the text and photo and video reports that we put out, we put on Reuters.com, which is our website, and we make some video of our own. But we also deliver these components to newsrooms around the world. So when you sit down to watch either news on digital or on TV, often you'll see, as well as the content that those newsrooms have gathered themselves through their own journalists, you'll probably see it supplemented with Reuters footage and pictures, particularly in places where those newsrooms perhaps don't have cameras, or if there is a press event where a limited number of cameras can go. So we're kind of behind the scenes a lot of the time, but the content that we put out really is crucial. And it's quite a thrill when you see the content that you've worked on turn up literally in every single language you can imagine across the world. So that's where I am now, but I started at Sky News and I was there for a decade, which is why I know Lou and Gamal and Andrew. And I did a range of different jobs while I was there. I think we'll talk about those more later on. And my focus of particular interest is social media. I've been interested in social media ever since I was at university. I remember Facebook was invented in my final year at uni, and I, instead of revising for finals, joined Facebook as a good procrastination device. But since then, it's really become central to my career, and we'll talk more about that later as well. But it is an essential part of journalism nowadays, and it's a good to understand how we can use it to our advantage.
Thank you, Hazel. And last but not least, Andrew Bailey.
Oh, how can I follow that? That's very difficult. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Andrew. I'm the digital managing editor for LBC and LBC News. I'm sure you've heard of these phenomenal radio stations, speech radio stations owned by Global, the media and entertainment brand that you may know owns radio stations like Capital, Heart, Classic FM and others. And we have a very significant digital presence now for LBC on our sites, on our socials, video content creation and outdoor screens, for which my team are responsible for creating news content and opinion content for all of those. So I manage a 24/7 team of digital journalists, social media editors, video editors, to keep us as Britain's most engaged talk radio brand on social. I've been in this business about 23 years now. that makes me feel very old, I have to say, when I say that. I started out in local radio in Liverpool, and really was quite a traditional route, worked my way up to be a news presenter. I then moved to be a news editor, moved from radio into TV, where I spent 5 years at Sky News with some of these lovely people here on this call, as a senior news editor at Sky. And then I moved to Global about a year ago to lead the digital strategy for LBC. And just to echo everything that Gamal and Hazel have said, it is a fantastic industry. And it's a very, very exciting time, I think, now to be in journalism. I don't think news has ever been more important than it feels right now. You kind of feel it in your veins. Every day there's something to kind of get curious or engaged or excited about. And I think that's why we're all in this business and why we'd encourage more people to get into it too.
Andrew, you are so right. We will have more of that, no doubt. Before we kick off, if anybody would like to write this up for the John Schofield Trust website, do volunteer now in the chat box, please. We would love to have your write-up. And of course, do please type in your questions into the Q&A box on Zoom. We will do our best to answer them in half an hour or so. We'll get to some of the questions. So shall we kick off? So I'm going to start with you, Andrew. And I would imagine that some people have an idea of their sort of dream journalism job that they really want one day. Maybe it's a TV presenter like Gamal, or a reporter, or a radio presenter, foreign correspondent, data specialist, whatever it might be. The big question is, that job's up here. How do you start? Where do you start to go from here to here? What's the journey?
It's a great question, and I think it almost starts almost before you might even think about it as a career, actually, because I think for anyone who's watching this, who's had sort of a burning curiosity to, get to the bottom of something, a desire to tell stories, to find out the truth in something, it can be a very basic level at school or college where, you get involved in your publication or a YouTube channel or a blog. It might grow where you start to get involved in a community radio station or a community blog, or you set up a WhatsApp group for local people. You're just starting to show that you're interested in your local area or in the thing that excites you, and you want to kind of share that enthusiasm or get to the bottom of it and communicate with people. And I think, for me now, looking at how people can start to get into the industry, it almost does start with that. You can really begin your journey at a very early stage, thanks to social media and a smartphone, and frankly, that technology helps you start to get a foothold already in the industry and to get a bit of a presence. Lots of people who've become very, very well known in this industry. Many of them have actually accelerated their careers through things like just using Twitter or YouTube or blogging, and I think that's what's so exciting, because it is very accessible to people. But there is no doubt, it has to be said that there is a route into a career in journalism. There is a fairly traditional route in, for people that perhaps want to go on courses, apprenticeships, internships. There are those routes into the industry, and they're incredibly important. And actually, so many companies now will, on their website, start to explain to you how, if you've got interest and you've got transferable skills, even if you don't necessarily have a qualification, I think that matters less and less these days. But it's about finding out that information, looking for those routes in, and many companies now, media organizations, will offer those routes through internships, apprenticeships, sponsorship schemes, work experience, which I think is really important, and we can perhaps talk about that a little bit later. There are many of those routes to get in, and I think from my own organization, maybe it's just helpful just to spend a minute just very quickly to explain as an example, if you like. So for somewhere like Global, which is a radio station, but also has a significant sort of digital journalism system that's set up as well, then there are loads of ways to get in for people who might have had a little bit of experience, working in a university or a college or just in their community, and they're looking to maybe see how they get a foot in the door. Actually, there are routes in. In fact, one of the key ways to find your way into a radio station like LBC is an assistant producer role, and actually those roles are filled by people that are got a sort of a great phone manner, who can take the calls in the gallery, who can communicate with people, who can listen to someone's story and think that's something that I think one of our presenters would want to talk to. It's a very, very important role in our operation, but actually it is considered quite an entry-level role. Very influential, very important, but it is an accessible role to somebody who thinks that they want to have a go. Many, many people will find that that is perhaps one of the first ways in. There are also lots of opportunities around digital journalism as well. And so one of the things that I would advise is looking at freelance opportunities too. Never be afraid to freelance. If you believe in yourself and you've got skills, actually getting out there and starting on that ladder as a freelancer, if you can do that, actually there can be massive opportunities. And certainly I've got a number of freelancers who started working for LBC, who've been able to progress up through the ranks, but their first foot on the door was that very early, hey, you know, I've got some work, what do you think of it? Could you have a look at it? Could you maybe give me some feedback? Here's my CV, are you looking for any work? Having that confidence, having your CV ready, or a link to your LinkedIn profile, and just finding out the right people to hassle and get your work in front of them can often be that route in. So it is, in summary, a bit of sort of old-fashioned tenacity. Find out who the right people are, get your profile, get your work in front of them, but do the digging and do have a look at the entry points that many media companies have through internships, work experiences, and other routes in. It's well worth doing.
Thanks, Andrew. That was really interesting. I mean, Gamal, you're a Sky News TV presenter now, but I'm guessing you didn't start there. So how did you start? What was your first job?
Well, I mean, your question was perfect, Louise. Like, you know, how do you get from that point to that point? You've got a goal, you kind of know where you want to go to. You know it's not going to happen tomorrow, but how do you get from point A to point D? And for me, it was all about building blocks. It's, if you think of it like, you know, I need to build a 6-foot wall. Where do I start from? You start from the very beginning, you start putting bricks down, and then you build and build and build and build. And for me, actually, unlike a lot of my peers, I kind of got into journalism a little bit later, because after I graduated from university, I really wanted to go either into the charity sector or to go into policy, so to work for, like, you know, think tanks and coming up with ideas and, you know, assisting government departments and all that kind of thing. And I worked for one particular think tank called Chatham House, and I worked in the Africa program there. And part of what we did was to have, like, organized conferences that involved journalists from all around the world, including the UK. And that's where I just developed this passion, because the thing about what we do, I think the two most important things for me is to know that we deal in a business where it's all about people, and we are storytellers. And when I spoke to these journos who had been around the world telling all these incredible stories, going to the most remote parts of the world, I was just like, wow, this is absolutely what I want to do. I want to be able to tell stories. I want to be able to write to pictures. I want to be able to have that ability to speak on behalf of people that may not have the capacity to speak for themselves. And so when I realized that, I actually applied to do a postgraduate diploma in broadcast journalism. I did that at City University in London. There are other universities that do a broadcast journalism course. And it was while I was at City University, and it's interesting that Andrew spoke about schemes and internships that are available, but I applied to do what was then called the ITV Newsgroup Bursary Scheme. And essentially what it was it gave me a 6-month attachment to a regional newsroom, which was Granada, which covered the northwest of England. And for me, that was my training ground. I mean, it was a great news patch, lots going on. You've got big cities like Liverpool, Manchester, you've got other cities like Lancaster and Preston, but then you've got the whole rural areas across Lancashire, in Cheshire and South Cumbria. And it was just a really great area to learn your trade, to learn the craft. And I worked in different areas with the newsroom. I started on the forward planning desk, where you start planning stories for the coming days, setting up stories with potential contributors and guests. I worked on the news desk for a little bit. I worked as an output producer, so I was producing the early morning bulletin, the afternoon bulletin. It sent me out on the road as a field producer. And then from there, I became a reporter and a correspondent. And then I moved on as a correspondent, moved to Good Morning Britain, and then to Sky as a reporter. And often for TV news presenters, the goal actually is never to be a TV news presenter. I know that sounds weird, but actually, first and foremost, we're journalists, we're storytellers, we deal in the business of people. And often, for the most part, most presenters almost fall into presentation a little bit later on in their career. But at the heart of it all, you know that you're a journalist. And so the questions that you're asking, they're all, that's really what our journalism is about now. When you're on live TV and everything is kind of on the hoof and in the moment and stuff, it's not so much storytelling and being a reporter and writing to pictures, but it's asking those journalistic questions, getting to the heart of the story. And ultimately, that is what we do. We get to the heart of the story, and we make sure that our audience, our viewers, have a real good grasp and understanding of that story. And for me now, when I do my interviews and I ask questions, what I tell myself is, well, what are the viewers getting from this? How are they going to understand this? Do I understand what is just being said to me? Because if I don't understand it, and I'm a news journalist and this is my bread and butter, what understanding stories, how's our viewer at home going to understand that story? And that's kind of what I tell myself every day, before I go on air. Viewers, people, stories. That's what really matters. And that's kind of essentially, how I got into sort of news presentation. A producer, an output producer, a field producer, a reporter, a correspondent, and now a news presenter.
I think it's really interesting what you and Andrew have both said is about there's no need to hurry. Every stage that you're doing is laying down a bedrock of good journalism, good skills, good understanding of how to tell stories, and then you build and build and build. Really interesting. And there's something else, Gamal, that you said there about kind of having sort of journalism and facts and information at the heart of what you do, because Hazel, kind of, good journalism is the main thing that we're all trying to do. But in your department, you really take that to another level with fact checking. So just give us a little bit more detail about the kind of things that your department is trying to do.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad you mentioned fact checking, because actually I've been in the privileged position of being able to recruit some fairly new journalists this year to join this fact checking department. And actually one thing I've really looked for throughout is an ability to really research well. It's not a skill that's unique to journalism. It's used in many other disciplines too, but being able to sift through quite a high volume of information, understand how to recognize quality sources, to ask the right questions, to realize when what you've read isn't actually enough to fully answer questions. And I think that's kind of one thing I encourage people to bear in mind. Show off your research skills. We really want to see those. But yeah, the fact-checking operation, this is kind of it's something that's stemmed out of a rise in social media and the rise in misinformation on social media. And you'll probably be aware that most of the big tech platforms are under quite a lot of scrutiny at the moment for misinformation around elections and health, which can have real life effects. And so to try to combat that, news organizations and tech platforms have sort of evolved a system of fact-checking claims which are shared on social media. So lots of outlets, journalistic outlets, are doing this these days. You get big publications and broadcasters like Reuters and USA Today and other kind of recognizable names doing this process. But you also get some quite exciting startups globally who are kind of just specialized in this craft of social media fact checking. It's a really strange job. I've spent I'm trying to think, 14 years in journalism now, and mostly it's about telling stories which are real, which genuinely happened, and sort of working out on any given day what people are talking about, which we need to share. Fact checking at the moment is about sifting through those and finding the lies, to be honest, and the things which aren't true and the things which are deceiving people. We need to, amongst that, find things which are still newsworthy. So we have been very busy recently with the US election. Obviously, there have been lots and lots of unsubstantiated claims around voter fraud. They've kept us extremely busy. And we know they're really important for people to understand because they are essential to people's trust in the democratic system in the US, but also beyond, I think. So we've had our journalists on the phone every day to election officials. We've been speaking to attorney generals. We've been speaking to all sorts of people activists who've captured things on mobile phones, and they have vote watchers in the US as well. We've spoken to them too. It's about piecing together evidence and trying to create a picture of what happened in a certain incident and work out whether we can pull out the strands of truth there and present it in a meaningful way. It's very varied. We've covered all sorts, from electoral fraud right through to conspiracy theory, QAnon conspiracy theory, and clearly COVID misinformation, which has been something we've all had to get our heads around this year. Clearly, there's a lot that's still unknown about this virus, and every time you get a situation where there's not clear answers, misinformation festers, and it really spreads far and wide very quickly. So we put a lot of focus, particularly in March and April, at the beginning of the first lockdown, when people were really anxious, into really tackling some of those claims which were driving fear. So it's quite rewarding in that respect. I think we feel through this work that although it can be difficult at times, it is genuinely helping people understand their world better. And that goes to the heart of journalism. So classical journalism, where you're telling true stories, is doing that too. We're trying to shine a light on those stories which aren't being told enough, have got implications beyond just a local community. And perhaps are difficult for people to see who are on the outside of. So communities that we don't hear from enough, or individuals whose voices aren't able to be heard. And that's what the role of the journalist is to do, is to pull out those stories. So the other half of my job actually is kind of linked to that, and it's user-generated content, UGC. Now, this is also an area that's grown rapidly over the last decade. The first user-generated content really began to be used in news bulletins about 10 years ago, and I'm talking about the material people capture on their smartphones. So at the scene of every news event where you've got a certain number of people around, the chances are someone will pull out their phone. Sometimes it's not advisable, but people do. It's a natural reaction, and they start capturing those images on their phone. And in a sense, that can be the most important imagery of a news story, because often it captures things as they unfold. I mean, the broadcast cameras will come in afterwards, but you're unlikely to be there at the moment of an unplanned breaking news story unless you had some sort of awareness that it might happen. But this eyewitness media is, again, shared on social media, and not all of it is authentic. And unfortunately, news organisations do get caught out running material that's not correct, which can erode trust over time in media. So it's really important that newsrooms have a system in place to verify this material before it goes out on air. And over the last 5 years, we've really seen lots of newsrooms, Sky, very much so, but Reuters and others, invest in increasing those units, working to bring in specialists. But it's been a great opportunity for people like me who had an interest in that to really kind of carve out a bit of a niche. So, it kind of came out accidentally, but knowing which trends are rising is really useful. So if you're thinking about joining the industry, make sure you stay across industry discussion. The Reuters Institute does a brilliant digital news report annually, which I highly recommend reading. It's really well presented and it's really fascinating. But it helps you understand what kind of things are becoming important in newsrooms, how news consumption is changing, and that can help you understand where the opportunities might be in future. And my industry, my area is so representative of that. UGC and fact checking, 10 years ago, my jobs didn't exist. And so it is great to kind of be on the start of the curve.
So that's really interesting. And Gamal, the thing I find interesting, so Hazel's department is doing all of that fact checking and behind the scenes work. You're live on air, sometimes having to sort of fact check as the story is developing live on air while something is happening. I mean, so what sort of skills do you think you need to be able to sort of handle that?
Yeah, I mean, it can be tricky, but I think what I would say, I would break it down into 4 parts. I mean, firstly, what I say, like I said just earlier, what you want to be constantly saying to yourself is, what is the point of this interview? Why are we doing this? What do I want to understand? What do I want our viewers at home to understand? If you have that clear idea in your mind, that's a really good starting block. The second thing, which is crucial, is homework. We've got a really, really good interviews team. And what tends to happen before you go live on air, you get what are called guest briefs. So you tend to have an idea of what an interviewee is likely to say, their position on a particular issue. So that you can use as a guide. Don't stick to it, because interviews can always move into different directions and stuff. And that's where you want to constantly be listening. The third point is listening. Listen, because there's a lot of blood, sweat and tears that goes into making TV, that goes into creating output. And although I'm only on air for 3 or 4 hours, there's been hours in the making of preparing this 1 hour of live TV, for example. So you've got to give everything that you have in that short period of time, and you've got to focus and you've got to concentrate, and you've got to really, really listen to what your interviewee is saying. Because if it's a politician, for example, if they're not across their brief, they can be found out quite quickly if you're listening really carefully to what they're saying. And that's when you can go in with a question. That's when you can start challenging. That's when you can say, well, look, hang on a minute. 2 months ago, your department had these figures. Why are you saying this now? What has changed since then? And then I'll say the next thing is keep your questions really simple. I mean, the most simple questions that you ask can almost be the most effective. A classic example today was my colleague Kate Burley was interviewing the defence minister, and it was a simple yes or no question. The story was there's going to be more spending on the defence budget, and there's a lot of controversy because a lot of people are saying, well, does that mean money's going to be taken out of the UK aid budget and then put into the defence budget? And what Kate did brilliantly was to say, do you support this? And the defence minister wouldn't give her a straight answer. And she asked the same question 3 times. Do you support this, yes or no? And the fact that he couldn't answer that question was revealing in itself. I'm never into long monologues before you ask a question. Keep your questions really short, tight, and direct. So I think those are the 4 things for me. It is live TV, it is often on the hoof, but if you really listen carefully to what somebody's saying, that's when the journalism comes in, and then you can start challenging and questioning. And as they say, having that brief is brilliant, but you don't stick to it because interviews can go in completely different directions, and then you can get really interesting news lines that nobody was expecting, which knock stories on. So, those are the things you kind of want to think about.
It's really interesting, that kind of focus on accuracy that you're talking to, the getting to the bottom of a claim that someone is making or a statistic that someone is giving. Hazel, that's exactly what you're doing. It's so important right now, isn't it, to have your journalistic head on, to have your wits about you.
Yeah, you definitely have to have your wits about you, and you also have to check your biases every single day at the door, because we all have natural bias, and that's normal. But when we approach claims, the big challenge is to think, this is my approach, this is what I've concluded, but what would the counter argument be? How would I argue against myself? And if you can have that kind of internal back and forwards with yourself, that's a really good part of the process. And I think we produce better journalism when we really challenge every single thing that we write. But yes, we do have to have our wits about us. Unfortunately, there are people out there who definitely want to see mainstream media make mistakes, or they want to hoodwink us, or tell us a narrative which is not representative. So we can't take anything at face value. I think skepticism is an excellent trait to develop. Sometimes you want to believe everything you see if it's a story which kind of backs up your own worldview, or seems kind of to be pull on the emotional heartstrings in a good way. But we need to be really careful about that stuff, because often the misinformation that spreads is designed to kind of create an emotional reaction, and that's why it can be so damaging. So yeah, we try to unpick everything carefully. You need to have a cool head, not rush into everything. If we see a story breaking, it's exciting working on breaking news. It's addictive. You get a rush of adrenaline. It's quite nerve-wracking, but it's also really, really is a thrill. And sometimes when you dive into that situation, you start seeing a piece of content or a bit of information that we definitely want to include. You can feel under pressure to put it out, or you really feel like you want to contribute it, but we need to take a step back every single time and really be rigorous. How do we know this is authentic? And I like to think sometimes in worst case scenarios, what's the worst that could have happened here? So actually one thing we've seen in the user generated content sphere is media that's been manipulated. So things that have been edited to show something else, or doctored. We saw a Joe Biden video from the election where somebody had photoshopped the sign behind him to read a different state. They were trying to show that he was confused because he said a different state in his introduction. Things like that, they are designed to trip people up. So it's about thinking what could have happened here? What could be the other story behind this? And crucially, who can tell me what the truth is? And that's often a harder question to discover, but it's usually a case of thinking about who else is there, understanding their motivation and why they're telling that story, having a really good conversation with them, which is, you know, the work that we do, a lot of it starts on social media, but it usually ends up on a phone call or even face-to-face in some cases. We really need to interrogate the people who we're speaking to on digital to understand the context of whatever claim or content that they're presenting. And then we look out for other independent markers of authenticity. So we have statements from authority, which may or may not, depending on where you're working, carry weight. You have other people who film the same incident, which can be very useful. So other broadcasters or other news cameras, but other people as well with smartphones. And then we look for other bits of information which we can check. You know, if we see a landmark in the back of a piece of video, we've got so many tools now which allow us to check out exactly where that was. Think of Google Street View. We can actually go and have a look and check whether that scenery matches what we might expect if we were in that situation. So it's about building up a sort of case of evidence. Sometimes I feel like I'm a lawyer for a prosecution, like I've got enough evidence here in my bag here to prove that this is an authentic claim or that it's an inauthentic claim. And you have to accept that sometimes there are really difficult judgments to be made. And that's the hardest bit of my job, is deciding at what point we have enough evidence to say something is authentic. But I think as long as we are rigorous and we follow our program of kind of trying to verify things, we're on the right track.
Whilst you were talking, I could see Gamal and Andrew both nodding about breaking news being so exciting, but also having to kind of, you know, take stock and follow the steps every time. I mean, I guess, Andrew, that chimes entirely with you. We all work in 24-hour news nowadays.
Oh yeah, I mean, you know what Hazel's saying there. It's verification has become such an important part now of the role of any newsroom. And I think, you know, I mean, I know personally some of the work that Hazel's been doing, but for any newsroom now, you know what? Not everybody has those skills. Not everybody understands those skills. Not every organization has senior management that really understand what's required. They just understand, you know, what's being outputted, and they want it to be right and accurate. And I do think what it provides now is an opportunity for people who are coming into the industry who are digital natives, who do have an understanding, and they get how media can be manipulated, to enter into the industry and to become experts very, very quickly, and to rise through the ranks with those expertise. And it's absolutely fascinating to see it happening in various media organizations, including my own, where, you know, you get people who are entering the industry and they immediately have that level of understanding. They're switched on, they have the critical eye and ears for things that they're seeing and hearing and reading. And I love that. And I think actually, as I said, it allows people to become experts very, very quickly and to become an integral part of any newsroom. It's fantastic to see it.
Gamal, it's interesting, isn't it? We quite often hear, you know, talk about we've got to be agile, but actually it's so true, isn't it? The kind of jobs that we do, and as Hazel was saying, the kind of different platforms or the different types of things that are emerging, you know, keeping an eye on that. We all need to be agile. You're doing today probably lots of different jobs that 10 years ago you weren't doing.
So I think in many ways we're living through a golden age of journalism. I'll give you a classic example. Like, you know, 20 years ago, you know, you could be in New York and not have any kind of idea what is going on in Yorkshire, for example. But now, I mean, I was scrolling through Twitter the other day, and somebody tweeted about a really interesting article that was on the Yorkshire Post, and it was about flooding a while back. And to have that reach now, which you didn't have, 15, 20 years ago, you know, this is an opportunity to have your work read or seen or heard by millions and millions of people now. It's not just, you know, if you start off in regional news or you work on your local paper, it's not just the local community that has access to that. It's people right across the globe, you know, and that is really, really exciting. And also we're living in a time where, you know, there's a real emphasis on, you know, getting things out of London. Not all roads lead to London. You know, you can go out to the regions, you can go to Manchester, you can go to Birmingham, you can go to Leeds. There are media hubs all around the country now. And really it's an opportunity to take advantage of that. Because when I first started, for example, I went to University of Manchester, a few years after I left, they developed Media City, and it's a huge hub where the BBC are there, ITV are there, there's loads of production companies are there. And on your points about being agile, all those opportunities, you just got to go and find it. And also, interestingly, hearing what Hazel has to say about verification. Now, you can pick up a camera and there's a fire in your local area, or you can pick up your mobile phone, you can shoot it. You couldn't do that 20, 30 years ago, So it's kind of like making most of these opportunities that, at our disposal. It's a really, really fascinating time. And also thinking about the different platforms, when it's not just all about TV these days, it's about radio, it's about podcasts, it's about sort of social. And when you're going into, a newsroom environment, try to tell yourself, okay, we've got this piece, which is on TV, let's put it on our digital platforms. That's not what you want to do anymore. So, well, how do we tell this story for a digital audience? Because the audience will be very different. How do we change the story for our podcast listeners? And it just gives you the opportunity to be really flexible and just really be energetic about the work that you're producing. It's honestly, it's a really, really great time to be in the business.
Hear, hear. I think we'd all agree with that. Andrew, let's bring it back then to starting out on your career. I mean, how do people, we've heard so many different kind of jobs already that we've all discussed, from verification to podcasting to reporting to planning producers to whatever, radio broadcast assistants. How do people get a good idea of what jobs are out there that they perhaps could actually apply for?
Yeah, I actually think applying your innate journalism to do some research online actually will help you, but you're doing it for your own self-interest. So I actually think it's quite important to dig around and look at the kinds of jobs that people are doing that actually interest you, or that you think are achievable or a part of your end game. Find people who are working in an organization. As Gamal and Hazel have both alluded to now, that the sort of onset of technology means that you have direct routes to be able to message people, whether you're just finding an email address or you're hitting them up on Twitter, or however you want to try and connect with people. I think it's important to look for people who are working in the organization that you are interested in. Look at the kind of job roles that are there, identify the roles that interest you, and message them. Don't be afraid. You'd be surprised by how many people, people love, whatever time of their career they're in, they love to give advice. They're very flattered actually by giving advice. And so quite often you'll find if someone takes the time to message you and ask you a question or for a bit of guidance, you will get a positive response from someone saying, yeah, take 5 minutes to try and explain that to you, or send you a message and try and give you some feedback. So be confident at doing that. Look and see if you can find people in an organization, look them up and see if you can connect with them, editors, reporters, podcasters, videographers, whatever it might be. Ask them about their jobs, try and pick their brains. As I say, people generally respond. You might look at different organizations. So it could be traditionally, local newspapers, local radio stations, regional TV, whatever. See if there are people there to help you, give you some feedback. Before you also look at the bigger media companies that are broadcasting, publishing nationally. But I also think something Gamal said earlier really chimed with me, which is, kind of like taking your time and have an end goal, but be prepared to take your time to get there. It's not a race that you need to rush on. It's not a sprint. Be in it for the long term. So actually looking, for example, at some of the regional media and thinking to yourself, people see my work, as Gamal says, all around the world, or hear it, read it, watch it. That is an amazing platform for your work. And so actually, if there are opportunities in places in the country that are recruiting or looking for people to come in, take that first step. Don't be afraid to travel and go and take that opportunity if it's there for you. Have a look at it. At Global, for example, we've got 8 regional broadcast centres around the UK who are producing fantastic regional news for our listeners and digital users in those patches, but they're regularly called on as well to appear both in vision and on air on LBC. So they're also getting a national and international platform there too. They're an absolute bedrock of what we do at LBC. They're completely integral to the output of our operation. And they are based out in the region. So Gamal, it's absolutely true. It's no longer is it just about London. It's about taking these opportunities wherever they present themselves. And I think also, I just wanted to say, you know, from within my team as well, the digital team, I've got people freelancing with me at the moment who are, you know, taking their first step into the industry. Actually, one has just been snapped up by the Telegraph for a training scheme that they're doing, but the other one just completing an MA actually. Both have a brilliant attitude to stories. They come on to shifts with great ideas. They never turn down a story that might present itself for them. And that skill, that tenacity, that actual self-belief is fantastic. Then they ask for guidance and ask for help when it's needed, but they always come in with ideas. And I think being able to show that in any of your approaches when you're looking to try and get a foot in the door is something that's important too. I know a lot of people may say, look, how do you do it in you know, with COVID? I understand that, as I said at the beginning, you know, work experiences and internships are harder at the minute, but this is not forever. I think we have to stay confident that you know, we will pass through this period, and that shouldn't hold you back from trying to start that conversation and start that journey. Even if physical work experience placements might not be available to you, don't let that stop you from just pursuing it and seeing if you can get a foot in the door. And I think finally, just to sort of give a bit of hope and a bit of scope for what could come. We had someone who joined us at LBC in March this year, just as lockdown was hitting, and came in to work as an assistant producer with the amazing Sheila Fogarty on her show. And she came in to work on the phones, you know, sourcing great callers to put through, as I said, really important. Learned how the station works, was at the heart of the gallery operation, just brilliant at observing, listening, taking in how you break news on air, how you find fantastic callers with great opinions, which is what we want at LBC, understanding how to handle a breaking story. You know, that person rapidly showed that she had great talent, was soon developed into planning and setting up, which is, I suppose, the next step within our organisation, and looking at how you do set up on a programme. And then bit by bit worked the way through to doing some overnight producer cover, and now outputting herself programmes like Andrew Pearce, Ian Payne, and regularly filling in, you know, on Drive as well for us with Eddie May. You know, that's just showing that within a short space of time, if you have the right skills, the right attitude, and you come in and show it, there is an opportunity for people to develop. And that excites me. And I see that happening in my organisation a lot. And I'm sure it's the same within many other organisations out there. So you come in with the confidence, get the foot in the door, and then take the opportunity, work hard, but be confident with your own skills, and the opportunities are there for you.
Some brilliant advice. Thank you, Andrew. Right. I realise it's 7:45 already. The time has absolutely flown. So let's canter through some questions. So we'll keep our answers quite short if that's okay. And Hazel, I'm going to throw this one to you first of all. And this is from somebody who is thinking of applying for a social media job. Could you give them any advice on what they'd be looking for?
Yes, first off, read the job advert really, really, really carefully, and then read it again. Because sometimes I've had people applying for social media positions I've had open at Reuters and haven't necessarily understood what the job entails, even though I've tried to explain it in the advert. If it's not clear, then call up the recruiters. There is really no problem with speaking to HR departments of these organisations, or if you know exactly who's going to be hiring, then contact them directly. You know, just be polite and say you're really interested in this job, but you'd really like to understand a bit more about the direction of it, or if you've got a specific question, then ask. And then make sure your CV is tailored to that job. Don't send the same CV to everybody. You can reorder things, you can highlight different bits that you've done. It does not have to be the same one. And if you've put that effort in, it will really pay off. So that's my top tip for social media jobs, because there are actually loads of jobs now with social media in the title, but they can be quite different. So particularly in journalism, there's quite a big division between social media news gathering, which is the side of the fence I've been on most of my career, and social media output, which is the people who will write posts to go on social media or present stories. So just sort of be aware of some of those distinctions.
You are so right about reading the job advert, because all the clues are in the job advert as to how to write your application. So do read it very, very well and follow it point by point. Right, here's another one. Just curious, what courses did you take at university? And just to let, I did information technology and French, so absolutely nothing to do with journalism. Gamal, what did you do?
So I did politics and history for my first degree, and then I stayed on to do a master's in international politics. And then I kind of went out for a couple of years doing a few bits and bobs, getting work experience, which is massive. So I worked at, it was called BBC Greater Manchester Radio at the time. I did some work there. I worked with Smooth FM up in Manchester. And then I did a postgraduate diploma in broadcast journalism. But on that postgrad diploma, what was really fascinating was my course mates did a range of different things. There were people who did maths, physics, IT, French, did languages. There were people who didn't have degrees, but they kind of did other bits, or maybe done a degree like 10, 15 years ago, and then have come into the course later on in their careers. So there's no hard and fast rule. You can be doing whatever discipline now. For that course, I think it's just showing that you have a real commitment and a passion and a dedication to be a storyteller. That's the building block that you need.
Andrew, what about you?
Music. That surprises lots of people. But whilst I was a student, I just got very heavily involved in my students' union and in the magazine that the university was producing, and I just, I loved it. I got involved in kind of arts reviews, and then I became sort of section editor, and then eventually stood as the sabbatical officer, and so did a year where I was actually paid by the union to edit the magazine for a year. And after that, I actually fell into PR. I did a year in PR, which is so often the other way around for journalists, where you might head at some point in your career out of journalism into comms and PR. I kind of started that way, and it was after a year of doing it, I was just absolutely committed in my mind that journalism was the thing I wanted to do. So I used the year to save up some money, and then put myself through a postgrad in journalism at City University, and then that was my route after that into local radio, regional radio, national radio, TV, and where I am now in digital music global. So yeah, it all came from the music degree.
And Hazel, what about you?
I did a Spanish degree. Languages are quite useful in journalism, but actually loads of specialist areas are. If you've got an economics degree, there's always economics journalism, and right now, if you're a biochemist, you're winning because we're writing so much about vaccines. So really, there are opportunities for people, whatever your area of interest, I think. And then I did an online journalism master's, which back then was quite a novelty to be doing an online journalism course. That was at UCLan in Preston. And I spent actually most of that year trying to do as little master's work and as much paid work as possible. So I took a few freelance kind of opportunities in Manchester and travelled for those. And again, that was a really good use of my time.
Yeah, I also noticed that somebody has asked, is it vital to have a degree to enter journalism? The answer is absolutely not. No, there are so many different routes in with, as you say, online courses, which you don't necessarily need to have a degree to take. There are apprenticeships and all sorts. So please don't think that you just need a university degree. That is not the only route in, and lots and lots of organisations have lots and lots of other schemes to get into journalism. Andrew, there's one specifically for you, and it says that I'm trying to transition and get experience in radio news as a producer and a presenter, currently involved with TV news producing, but interested in radio producing and presenting. So at this stage, they're asking, do they need to specify which direction to get involved in, or can they do a bit of both? What's your thought?
I think they can do a bit of both, because actually I quite often find great presenters have often started, and learnt their craft as producers. And so I don't see why actually there isn't an opportunity to, if the opportunities are there to keep both of them going, then I would absolutely say do so, because also the industry, as you're working your way before you get that presenter gig, there just may be some really fantastic solid work to be done producing as well. So I would say, I think it was Osman, wasn't it, on the chat, I would absolutely, keep going if you can, as both. And actually don't assume that if you were to approach radio companies, that actually those TV skills won't be just as valuable to them as, the radio abilities that you might have. You may have seen at LBC, we've had a significant move into visualization, over the last few years. And I think now for us, it's as important that the visual aspects of our presenters and our reporters are as important as the audio skills as well. So it sounds to me like, if you can keep all of that going, you make yourself a very valuable potential, employee for an employer.
Thanks, Andrew. I wonder, Gamal, maybe you can answer this one. How could a fresh journalism graduate like myself with moderate journalistic experience break into the industry during COVID? I've reached out to local and national newsrooms. It's hard at the moment, isn't it? It's hard.
It's really hard. It's tough times. But as Andrew said earlier, you just stick at it. Just stick at it. It's a tough old industry. It is competitive, and sometimes it will feel like you are banging your head against the wall, but no condition's permanent. And if you've got the commitment, you've got the dedication, you've got that drive and that self-belief, that is so important, having that confidence in yourself that you will achieve your goal, you will get there. And you just keep on telling yourself that every time you get a knockback, because there inevitably will be knockbacks. I've had lots of knockbacks in my career, but you just got to keep at it. You just got to have that faith in yourself. And then something does open, and you need to make sure that you're ready to go when something is open. And often as not is when you're least expecting it. I mean, how I got into Sky, for example, was I was working at regional news, and I contacted the managing editor at the time. I just dropped him an email with a show reel and a CV to say, really keen to come on board. Here's my work. Here's a snapshot of my work. Can I come in for a coffee? Can I come in for a chat? The rest is history. And it was, I sent it off, and I sent it off to the BBC, and sent it off to ITV, Network News. Nothing happened, and then all of a sudden, there's an email in my inbox saying, "Hi Gamal, really like your work. Can you come in for a chat on this day?" And it's like, "Oh, mum, got this. I'm coming to Sky News." And so just have that belief that something will open up. And also because, we're in a business where you ask some questions, you've got to be dogged, you've got to be relentless, and you pursue for stories. You've got to have that attitude yourself. And if you get a knockback, you just got to just be aggressive with yourself and say, right, pick myself up, dust myself off, on to the next thing. I guarantee you it will open up. If you're passionate about this industry, if you're passionate about telling stories and people and getting to the heart of the story and getting to the truth, somebody will identify that.
I'll echo something that Andrew said actually earlier on. Network. This is just, organisations like the John Schofield Trust, but there are plenty of others, are great opportunities to network with people, stay in touch with people, email them, email us. and have a chat with us. You'll be amazed at how many people actually do reply when you email, and you start to build up your network of people that you can ask advice from, and you have that conversation, and you'll be amazed at how people then suddenly remember and say, oh hey, we've got a job going, do you want to apply for that? It might not get you the job, but it might get you into the application process at least. So network. Hazel, there was a question earlier on that was about how do we improve our research skills? What's your advice on that?
I'd say choose an area that you're interested in, whether it's an aspect of the news that you're interested, you want to follow, learn more about, or if it's completely different, and sort of challenge yourself to learn something new, to understand a bit better, to think about who the key voices are in this area. And maybe a great idea to think about how you would write a new story about it as well, even if you're not being paid to do it. It's interesting to kind of think about how you could report it, even if you don't end up writing it. So I suggest that. And then also just read a lot. You really do need to absorb a lot of information in this job. And part of it is just making sure you are taking a lot every day, trying to critically analyze it, but being able to sift through a lot of information is a good skill and one to stay on top of.
Yeah, Louise, can I just echo what Hazel said? It's really crucial in the early days that you're a sponge. you've got to absorb so much information, and you've got to just enjoy that process, because at that level, you're learning so much from different people, senior people who've been in the business for a long time, people who are a couple of years ahead of you in their careers, and you just want to be a sponge. And because that all the information that you're taking in, you can have it for the next place that you go. You'll bring in all that wealth of experience to the next place, and then to the next place, and the next place after that. And then before you know it, you've got 5, 6, 7 years of experience in the industry. So that's really something to think about.
Louise, I'm so sorry, just one point on that, just because I think it's so important to say this, that never stop having that attitude as well. Because, 20 odd years in the business, but I've moved around between radio, between TV, between digital now as well. And I think being able to continually learn, absorb, as you say, like a sponge, reinvent yourself if you need to, learn new skills, believe in the fundamentals, which are journalism, storytelling, getting to the truth, but being able to apply it in different ways, and not being afraid actually to say, I'm going to take a sort of leap of faith, I'm going to try something new, no matter sort of how old you are and whatever stage you are in your career. I think that sort of sponge mentality of continually learning, even when you become quite senior in your job, is just really important to say that. And don't lock yourself down into one niche. Be prepared to take a leap of faith and try something different, because it can be incredibly exciting and just open up, a whole new strand of journalism for you.
Andrew, I'm going to stick with you actually, because we're getting lots and lots of questions from people about how do you stand out either in your application to a university course, or how do you stand out in a job interview on Zoom when we're having to do them like this, rather than what's the thing that you must recruit people all the time? What's the thing that you think, oh wow, that's amazing?
Over the years, there've been all sorts of things that people have done to try and stand out. And I shall tell you a secret. The way I got my break into national radio when I was working in local radio was I wanted this job on the Virgin Radio breakfast show. It was just like the dream job that I wanted. I was hounding and hounding and hounding, managed to get conversations with people in the end. But ultimately, I had an interview to be the newsreader for this show, and it had just all gone a bit quiet. And I just very boldly decided that I was going to design on my computer at home a newspaper front page with me getting the job. So I did that with a big picture of me and the Virgin Radio logo and a whole headline and all these things about that radio station. And I sent it to the program director with my demo just to remind him that I was still interested and keen. And that actually was what was then taken into discussions with the presenters, and ultimately I think it just made me stand out from other people. So I'm not suggesting that will work for everybody, but you are right, Louise, in the question to say, that you do have to try and sort of elevate yourself if you can, and offer something different from everyone else. And the thing to do is to not actually worry about anyone else, is to think about you. What do you offer? What do you believe that you could bring to that organization? If you're going to produce a demo, a little tip, certainly for me this works, make it bespoke, make it work for that particular organization. I received one the other day with someone who had filmed a demo, an InVision reporter who was keen to work with us at LBC, and the whole thread was talking to me. Had taken the effort to find out who I was, I don't know this person, and had introed their demo to me. It was threaded through their demo, and at the other end of it, it was sort of wrapped up as well. And in between, it's some of their best work. And I thought, yeah, that stood out because that person had taken the time to bespoke it. So whatever platform you're on, whatever part of journalism you're in, if you can find out a bit about that organization, make it feel like it's special for the person that's either recruiting or not, and you're just speculating. Do something that makes it feel like you really understand their platform, their product, their organization, and put a bit of yourself into it.
That's good advice. One for you, Gamal, I think. Do you have any tips on gaining confidence as a journalist? How do you pluck up the courage to interview people effectively or have phone calls with them?
Relax, take a deep breath, think through what you're going to ask, what you're going to say. Again, it's just having that belief in yourself, because if you don't believe in yourself, then nobody else will. and just pause. Sometimes it's good to just take a big deep breath and to say, right, what am I trying to do? And at the start I said, you know, it's about, we think about what are our viewers going to get out of this? What are they going to learn? What are they going to understand? So sometimes you just got to be really measured in your thinking, and you've just got to be really calm. And often I say, when people ask me, you know, what's it like and delivering like breaking news, we are often like swans. On the surface, you're quite graceful, or in theory, you're supposed to be quite graceful and in control and measured. But underneath, you're kind of like, there's loads of moving parts, lots going on. People in your ear talk, you know, you're chatting away and telling you how many minutes you have on an interview and all that, and that kind of thing. So it's just, you know, it's almost, I'm not meditating, but almost you're just taking the time to kind of really think about what you're doing, you know, and the confidence almost follows, you know. If you think about it, when you're really nervous, because you've got a job interview, or, you know, you've got a test, you know, the best thing to do is to kind of take a few deep breaths, and just breathe out. And then your thought process, everything starts to kick in and starts to engage, you know. So that's what I would say. That's kind of where my confidence comes from. It's having that belief in myself, and knowing what I'm going to do, the different steps I'm going to take.
There's one here that says, I live in Stoke-on-Trent and I really do wish to get into the journalism industry. Any advice for starting off in a small town? Well, full disclosure, I grew up on the Isle of Wight, so, you know, it's not the biggest newsy patch, but I got involved in my local radio station, and I'm sure other people have had similar experiences. Most counties have got a radio station or a newspaper or whatever, and I just got stuck in through myself. I knocked on the door a lot. I'm sure other people had the same experience, where you found a radio station or a newspaper that would take you and you could go and work for. So the fact as to where you live shouldn't make any difference. News happens anywhere. Let's have a look at some of these other questions.
Louise, I'm going to have to shoot because I'm on air in an hour's time.
Gamal, I forgot. Yes, Gamal is actually on air at 9 o'clock and presenting Sky News at 10 tonight as well. So we're going to say goodbye to Gamal. Thank you very much. Hazel and Andrew, are you okay to stay?
Yes, yeah.
We'll answer a couple more questions. Gamal, thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Just one last thing. Just stick at it, guys. It's a wonderful industry, like I said at the start. Stick at it, and just have faith, confidence, and the rest will follow. So the best of luck. See you again.
Thank you, Gamal. See you. Bye. We'll let him go and do the actual news.
That's a great excuse, Louise, isn't it? I'm so sorry. I've got to go and do Sky News at 10. Do forgive me.
I have to actually get there and do the news that we're all talking about. We'll all be tuning into him in 57 minutes' time. One hit for you, Hazel. How important is it to remain impartial when reporting political events such as the 2020 election? Does the polarization and hostility of political journalism worry you? And is censorship an issue in regard to social media? Does this worry you as well?
Oh wow, two big meaty questions there. Yes, it is crucial to be impartial when reporting on political events. I mean, it depends who you work for, of course, but everywhere I've worked for has absolutely strived to be impartial when covering politics. And one thing that everybody who wants to go into journalism should remember is, if you are on social media and you are using it in a way that is going to be used through your career, it's not a private account, then just remember that what you've written may be reviewed by people who are recruiting or by organisations who are interested. So I would advise, you're absolutely free to express political opinions, but just bear that in mind if you do want to go into journalism, that there probably comes a point where you either need to make a clear break or just think carefully about what you post. I think that is just something to bear in mind. For us, covering it as a kind of broadcaster or a digital outlet or a newspaper, yes, politics is obviously an extremely it's an area that's full of spin and full of people who want to tell you a certain narrative. And it's interesting from the fact-checking point of view, seeing what politicians get away with. To be honest, I mean, it's quite incredible. Some of the stats that are seemingly made up on the spot, or misrepresentations of things that have happened. So it's actually really satisfying sometimes to be able to show that those aren't accurate. or they are not complete. That's the other thing. Selective kind of choosing of information to import is a classic political manoeuvre. And it's quite rewarding as a journalist to be able to unpick some of that. And, you know, shame we haven't got Gamal here, but his interviews with politicians, and he alluded to that before with Kay Burley's question, you know, if you know that that stat they gave you isn't necessarily complete, and you can work out what the next question should be, then it can be really exciting to kind of be able to really get to the bottom of stuff. So that's kind of politics. Onto the social media censorship. This has been a huge area for me to be concerned with over the last few months, because obviously it's been very high profile. We've had President Trump express his displeasure at being censored on social media. And I think this conversation has a long way to run yet. It's actually a pretty new step for the social media companies to moderate misinformation. They've always had policies around harmful content, and that's, you know, those have been in place for some time. But misinformation, which isn't directly harmful to an individual but could be harmful to a society, this is really the first time we've seen kind of proper action being taken by the tech platforms, and it's interesting to see how those actions are quite different. And it's also, you know, very important for me to understand, because our fact-checking work is having a direct impact. We work as third-party fact-checkers for Facebook, and that means that our fact-checks attach themselves to bits of content that we have identified as being misleading. So we don't take down content, but we are adding labels to it, and so we need to be happy that what we're doing is beneficial and helps people understand the world better. But I really think this conversation has got a long way to run. I think the landscape will look very, very different in a year's time, and again in 5 years' time, as people start to better research the effect interventions like this are having, and also as the policy just becomes more evolved, and we've encountered stuff that we've seen before and we've learned from last time. And people make mistakes, everybody makes mistakes, but it's how well those companies can learn from them, and society, that really can show, you know, progress and how things can get better. But good question to ask.
Amazing question. I'm going to squeeze in one last tiny little one to you, Andrew, before we wrap up. And a couple of people have asked this. Are journalism qualifications really needed to work in a newsroom?
No, I don't think they are. I think, to answer the question honestly, I think what they can do is they can make it easier to get a foot in the door. I think we have to admit that, because that's just it's just a fact that by having a journalism qualification, quite often that comes with some work experience, which may be organised via reputable, accredited organisations, which can enable you to then get into a newsroom and show what you can do and how you could then be valuable to that company. So I think that's just a fact that it enables the access point in, but it isn't necessary. So I think it's really important to say that, and I can't say this enough, that, you know, all the news organisations that I know of right now are actively looking for you know, the future journalists to join their organisations who aren't just coming through that traditional route, because I think everybody recognises that there are so many skills that are needed to be a journalist, so many opportunities to tell stories. It shouldn't all be from one you know, academic route into a newsroom. So no, I don't believe it's necessary. I believe, as I've said already in this chat, that there are multiple ways to gain entry into newsrooms via all sorts of different schemes that are not dependent on you having a journalism qualification. It can help, but actually nothing replaces your tenacity, as Gamal said, your belief in yourself, your commitment to it, and being able to now show what you can do without a journalism qualification, to me actually is arguably more impressive. You know, I've recently taken on a freelancer, and I hired him actually off the strength of his work on his own YouTube channel. He happened to have a journalism qualification, but the thing that attracted me to him was this talent that I saw, his ability, his investigative work, his commitment in his free time to delivering and producing this content, the production skills that he put into it, and just the impressive storytelling. And I loved that. And that actually was the thing that just really hooked me in to you know, opening the conversation with him. So if you can produce work like that, it doesn't matter whether you've been to college or university or not.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Hazel, and thank you to Gamal, who's had to dash off. We will bring it to an end there because I realise we've gone 10 minutes over time, and so I do appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody, for watching, for sending in some absolutely amazing questions. I mean, if your questions are that good, then I feel confident that you will make fantastic journalists of the future. So I'm sure there will be more John Schofield Trust events in the future, which I really hope you will consider joining. Keep an eye on their Twitter page or on their website. But in the meantime, thank you all very much, and we will leave it there and say good night. Thank you.